Welcome to the Benzo Free Podcast, your home for an honest, straightforward, and personal discussion about anti-anxiety drugs, their effects, and how to deal with dependence and withdrawal. Whether you have taken benzodiazepines, Z drugs, or any other tranquilizers, know someone who has, or you just want help dealing with chronic anxiety and insomnia, this is your podcast. I'm your host, D.E. Foster, author of the book, Benzo Free, The World of Anti-Anxiety Drugs and the Reality of Withdrawal. I'm so glad you joined us today. Please stick around and let me bend your ear for a few minutes. It just might feel a little better on the other side. Hello there, this is Dee, and welcome to episode 88 of the Benzo Free Podcast. I'm still at home, heading back to KC first week of September, I think I mentioned in our last episode, but still catching up on things around here like the website and getting this interview recorded and out. Still have kind of a wave going on here, and I don't want to be negative, but I still have some recurring symptoms. I wish I didn't, but they're actually kind of a comfort to me, and I think I mentioned this before, but I have benzo belly and distension, and it was such a surprise because I was gaining weight and I was feeling bloated and I was trying to figure out what was causing it, and I couldn't figure it out. And it's funny how you forget these things when you haven't had a symptom for a while. And then it hit me that, wait a minute, this is benzo belly, this is distension. This is not all just weight gain, it's a reaction to the food I'm eating. And that helped because now I understand better what I'm going through. And honestly, it's benzo withdrawal. I've been here, done this, and I can get through this okay. Good news is I know how to, like I said, I know how to manage it. And I know this is a wave and it's going to pass. And I don't have these waves very often. As I mentioned before, I've been under a lot of stress this year. And I also let myself go. I wasn't taking good care of my physical health. And that combination triggered a wave or two to hit me. And that's okay. I mean, that's normal. I think it's kind of good sometimes because it's a reminder to say, D, wake up. You got to take care of yourself. And you're not doing that. And this has helped me to step back. In fact, I've been putting off so many things on my own personal health. And went back to my skin checks with my dermatologist, and everything's okay there right now. And I finally made my first dentist appointment in probably almost 3 years. Thankfully, I did okay with that one too. And I made an eye appointment, found out how bad my vision is and why I'm not seeing the screen here very well. So I got to take my glasses in and get new lenses here pretty soon. But I also got that checked out, and I need to make a doctor's appointment. I haven't been following up with her much lately. So all these things I'm trying to do, and also my diet. My diet was really bad, and I need to get back onto a more simple diet, especially while I'm having some benzo belly symptoms. Just back when I was in acute withdrawal, I would often eat just chicken and white rice because it was the only thing that didn't set me off. And thankfully, I know what to do. So I'm going to just back up a little bit, take better care of myself, and realize this will pass, which it always does. But I figure every now and then, those GABA receptors are going to freak out a little bit and say, hey, we still have a little bit more healing to do. Just hang in there. And that's the way I see it. And I'm okay with that. It doesn't have to be discouraging. It doesn't have to be creating any sense of hopelessness, because it's not. I have not had any serious symptoms, any serious waves in a year or two. So the fact that I'm having a little bit now, I think, is just the final gasps of benzo withdrawal hanging on before it fully lets go and lets me get back to normal life. And I'm okay with that. It's all good. I had a chance to get up to the mountains again. As many of you know, I think I mentioned before, I was up in Vail a little bit ago for my friend's wedding. And then last weekend we went up to Estes Park. Estes Park is, for those who don't know, here in Colorado, it's the entrance to Rocky Mountain National Park. So it is just this gorgeous town. My wife still does some work for our former HOA up there, and so we had to go up to do some work, and so we stayed at a friend's condo and had a nice weekend. I forgot how beautiful that area was. We lived there for 7 years, and it was pretty amazing living in Estes Park, living up in the mountains with that kind of view and just getting out into nature. My wife and I probably took 2 or 3 walks and hikes, each day we were up there, and just enjoyed. And the town, it's a quaint little resort town there at the base of Rocky, we just call it Rocky, Rocky Mountain National Park. And just the town around there, seeing what's changed. For those who have ever seen, we used to live right on the property of the Stanley Hotel. And for those who have been there, they know what that is. For those who haven't, the Stanley Hotel was the inspiration for the book and movie The Shining. It wasn't where it was filmed, but it's where Stephen King stayed and where he was inspired to write the book. So that's where it all came from. And they, of course, have publicized that and everything since then. But it was a gorgeous place to live. And it was nice to get back out and just walk into nature. And the nice thing, too, was the smoke wasn't as heavy up there as it has been down here on the Front Range for so long. We've probably only had 3 or 4 days where we've seen the mountains here north of Denver in the past month and a half due to the smoke from the Pacific fires. So it's been pretty bad around here, and I'm sure I know the rest of the country, you're also dealing with that in other parts of the world. I know there's a lot of fires that were going over Siberia and other parts of Europe. So I know we're just not the only ones dealing with that here. But anyway, as I ramble, which I do, as you all know, I just wanted to mention that it was nice to get away, and that getting up to, getting to Vail with my buddy for the wedding was great, but there was a lot to do, and it was fun. But we were always doing things because there was a lot of things for the wedding to get done. In Estes Park, my wife had the meeting to go to, which was the homeowners meeting that she had to attend. But outside of that, we had our own schedule. And it was just nice for the two of us to get up, have a decent place to stay, get out and go for walks, and, just catch up on things. And I really enjoyed that. So anyway, I just wanted to let you know that while I am still suffering from some symptoms, I'm still out there living my life, and I'm going to go out there and enjoy things and do things as we can and make the most of it. And also I wanted to mention too something else on this, which is I've been seeing some really good information and events and all kinds of things, communications coming from my 2 favorite organizations in the benzo community, which are the Alliance for Benzodiazepine Best Practices, I just call them the Alliance, and Benzodiazepine Information Coalition, also called BIC. And so I kind of wanted us to talk about that real briefly. There's been a lot going on with both these organizations. At the Alliance, which you can find at benzoreform.org, that's their website. And you might hear some clicking because I'm actually clicking to their websites as I talk about this. But one thing that the Alliance has coming out recently was their doc talks. And this has been really interesting. Unfortunately, I was going to promote this on our podcast, but their last event was the one that they had most recently was on August 17th. And unfortunately, I am now recording this intro on August 18th. I'm a little behind, so I apologize to them for not getting this out earlier on a podcast. But I am sure that they'll probably have more events with this. I really hope they do. So please check out their website and learn more about that. But this Doc Talks program are really good programs, and I think it's ability for you to have direct contact and get help. They're basically virtual events where patients have the opportunity to talk to benzodiazepine expert medical professionals. And after a 15-minute lecture on key benzodiazepine topics, the experts are there to field your questions about your experiences. Now, the first event of this was on June 22nd. They have another one on August 17th. Hopefully they'll have more coming out, so please go to their website, back up, slow down. Okay, I have to remind myself sometimes when I'm doing this. Please go to their website at benzoreform.org and learn more about this. It's a great program. They also mentioned that in July, the Alliance also participated in an FDA forum, and it was a workshop featuring dozens of presenters and panelists. And a lot was done there and talked about. Dr. Stephen Wright, who's a friend of mine, and I've had him on the show before, was presented as a panelist. Several key people from the FDA and NIDA attended. And it was just an excellent workshop to provide information about benzodiazepines from many perspectives. So a lot is being done, and that's why I'm mentioning these things. If we pop over to BIC, there's a lot more on the Alliance. Please go check them out on their website. Again, benzoreforum.org. If we jump over to BIC, Benzodiazepine Information Coalition, they have so much going on too, and their newsletter I've been really amazed with lately. They've really upped their game on their newsletter, are providing so much good information. If you haven't gone to visit them, and they're of course at benzoinfo.com, if you haven't gone to visit them, please do so and sign up for their newsletter. A lot of really good information coming out there, and so much their media outreach, their just the work they're doing within the medical community and within the patient community has been amazing. And I'm really proud to say that I get an opportunity to work with them many times, and I'm friends with many of the people on their board and people that work there. And it's an outstanding organization. Both the Alliance and BIC are just doing so much. In fact, there was this article not too long ago from Dr. Christy Huff on 10 tips to find medical help with benzodiazepines. Oh, I get into these things and I get excited. And I think for a lot of you, many of you have mentioned that you enjoyed my voice because it's that lower baritone voice. And when I'm calm and relaxed, it comes out. But when I get excited about things, I start talking faster and it raises. And I've mentioned this before. Oh, but I do try to back up and slow down and say things a little slower. Anyway, the article I'm talking about is called 10 Tips to Find Medical Help with Benzodiazepine Cessation from Dr. Christy Huff. So that's one you can check out. And they have so much good information on their site. They're sharing benzo stories. They just had their 5th anniversary, so they're really going strong here. And I just want you to pay more attention to some of the other organizations out there. We all need help. We all need to go seek information. And these two organizations, the Alliance and BIC, of course, are in my opinion, two of the best out there. Oh, let's see. Okay, so back over to my script. That was off script a little bit, just looking around on website things. But I think that's it. Let me just wrap up my intro here and say a couple admin things, and we'll get on with our conversation with Dr. Bradley. Today, our format will include our introduction, which you just heard, and of course, the feature, which is the conversation with Dr. Bradley. And before we move on, don't forget, I still would love to hear from you. Comment on our videos on YouTube, podcast posts, or our feedback forum at easinganxiety.com/feedback. And while you're there, perhaps you might want to subscribe to our mailing list or even donate to support the work we do. It really helps. And remember, the Benzo Free Podcast is for informational purposes only and should never be considered medical advice. Our feature today is part 2 of a conversation with Dr. Colin Bradley. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, you might want to check that one out first. It's in episode 87, and it can be found on our website at easinganxiety.com or on our YouTube site or podcast carriers. I also share Dr. Bradley's bio in the introduction of that episode, and I won't be resharing it here. So if you want to hear his full bio, please go check out that episode. And please check out our show notes for our chapters section. If you want to go to a specific topic within this conversation, you can actually see that in our chapters section of our show notes. And I think that's it. Let's join part 2 of the conversation with Dr. Colin Bradley. Okay, we're back. This is part 2 of our conversation with Dr. Colin Bradley, and I wanted to just pick up kind of where we left off. We mentioned a little bit about the street use within Cork and within Ireland and how that's going. I want to move a little bit now into more of the iatrogenic, more of the prescribed, taken as prescribed, harmed area, because that's really, most of our listeners are more in that area. People who have been taking the drug as prescribed, regular doses for some period of time. I was on clonazepam for 12 years and taken as prescribed, and it took me 18 months to come off, 7 years off, and still have some symptomatology from that experience. And this is the case with a lot of people who are listening to this. One of the things I think we have trouble getting across to the medical establishment is understanding the actual severity and length of withdrawal for some individuals. Can you speak a little bit to that area?
Yes, I and again, it's something I must confess, it took me a little while to appreciate myself, even though I was sort of, as you say, alerted to the problem very early on in my career. I'd just say, and some of this to do with our education, I'd have to say, is that we're told that these are drugs only for short-term use. They have a potential for creating dependence and so on. But as I say, the detail beyond that is not definitely discussed or highlighted in our education. And as you say, we're told that when people are two things were kind of messages were given. One is that they should only be used for short-term use. But what's not dealt with is, will someone say gets a benzodiazepine because of some crisis situation that they faced, and they get them for a few weeks, maybe a month or two, and then the next thing they come back and say, well, I'm a little bit better now, but if I miss my diazepam or alprazolam or whatever, I don't feel well. So can I just have a few more? And before you know it, then it becomes a regular prescription. And I was saying we have this system here where people can get repeat prescriptions without being seen or reviewed, and quite quickly it can slip into regular 3-monthly or 6-monthly prescribing. And before you know it, then, as I said, they've been taking it for years. Then something may happen, either a physician may identify that this is something that should be tackled, or someone may say to the person, or they may read something, whatever, and they say, look, I'd like to come off these. And then we get into the situation where we've not really had very much education as to how that process works. As you say, there are things like that Ashton manual and so on, but in the generality of medical education, it's not really addressed. In fact, the whole thing about deprescribing as a whole concept is relatively new, and the fact that people can sometimes need help to come off drugs, and not just these drugs, but lots of different drugs, particularly any drugs that work on mental health, getting people off their drugs safely and without mishap, as I say, is a bit more challenging than the medical text or medical education would have you believe.
Yeah.
So yeah, as I say, I think that is a common situation. Again, like all these things, there's a lot of variability. So there have been studies done, for example, and I've seen where people have been written to, for example, by their family doctor, said, look, you've been on this drug for a number of years.
Right.
We think you should try and come off it. And they suggest a sort of a relatively straightforward weaning process, and the person goes through that weaning process and they're off it, no problem.
Right.
But as you say, there are a lot of other people whereby that it isn't as simple as that, and the whole weaning or withdrawal process is a lot more complicated. And first of all, the pacing of it has to be very individualized. One of the other things I learned, again, and not when I first started doing this, but this thing of when people are weaning off, they sometimes have to stop at a certain point, stay on a certain dose. And the trick there then is really to encourage them to say, look, I know you feel you want to go back up in dosage, but that's not where we want to end up. We want you to get to a point where you're free of this medication. You want it out of your life. So let's put up with a certain degree of pain and discomfort, but keep it the same dose. Now, we're not going to keep pressing down on the dose because that's going to cause you even more distress and discomfort. We'll have to live with a certain amount of distress and discomfort. We'll get you through a period which can be quite extensive, as you say. It can be months on a sort of fixed dose lower than their initial dose, and then you can kind of, when things sort of stabilize, so to speak. And it's interesting because I was saying earlier that sometimes it can be to do with what else is going on in their life. So if they're under a lot of stress, there's a lot of stuff they're having to put up with, then that's not a good time to be doing a wean. It might be time to
exactly. I'm really glad you said that, because that kind of hits on, and we'll talk more on this, but this hits on what I went through, because I went to a physician who actually didn't believe I should come off of. I mean, the doctor who prescribed me believed that I should stay on it. He had no problem. I went back to a previous physician who I was more comfortable with, and he actually said, well, I don't believe you have to come off it, but it looks like you've done your research and I'll be happy to work with you. But he made me wait for 6 months. And I talk about that often on the podcast. It was the best thing anybody ever did to me. I was not mentally stable. I was a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear and trepidation about the process. I had unfortunately gone online and read the horror stories of what people had been through. And so he knew I needed to stabilize for 6 months before attempting the taper. I do think that was one of the best decisions that was made. And like you said, I think I'm glad that you brought that up too, that sometimes it's not the right time. Sometimes there's too many stressors in your life and you need to adapt and change. Or if you're okay and you're not having a lot of tolerance withdrawal at this time, then maybe it's okay to wait a little bit until there's a better time.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's a big factor in, as you say, working with people and absolutely, I'd say that, and it's great to see, because then you sort of said, you tell me when you're ready to take the next steps. But look out for opportunities as well. So, there'll be some time, like, for example, if there's something going on in your life that's kind of stressing you, that may change. Things do change. An interesting example some years ago as well, I was stuck with me as well, is that I had a woman like that who I was helping to withdraw, and she was stuck. And that's the thing that happened. People get stuck at a certain dosage. That'd be the physician perspective. We wanted to get down, but they're saying, no, 8 milligrams, I can't manage it any less, and that sort of thing. But then one time she said, okay, I'll have another go. You can start going down again. And I asked her what had changed, and she said, I got a cat.
I like that.
Yeah, so it's just to know what's going to change. But she said, look, I've got a cat. I feel more comfortable in my life in general. I feel things are going well for me. But that was one of the indicators, shall we say. And so off we went. So two things that I've learned, say very much that a lot of my colleagues don't necessarily appreciate. One is this thing of having to stick at a certain dose and stabilize things for a while.
Right.
And the second thing then is, this isn't, again, every patient, but these are the ones that are sort of challenging, is that the last few steps can, again, be very tricky.
Yeah.
And that's where I do go along with the thing that's in the action manual to convert people to diazepam.
Yes.
So no matter what they're on, the diazepam is the easiest one to finish the withdrawal on, so to speak. Now, it's, again, very patient-specific as to when you make that step to diazepam. You don't want to put everybody on straight away because that doesn't suit everybody, especially if they're coming off some of the more short-acting ones like alprazolam. It can be very difficult to go from that to diazepam, which is long-acting. If you do the conversion, you can, and yourself, the conversion dosages. But again, that's not always straightforward. You may need to get them down to a certain dose on their existing drug and then do the conversion. So,
well, and another benefit of the substitution, as you said, is also some of the other medications like clonazepam and the other ones. It is very difficult to taper down unless you do a micro taper or a scale. I mean, the lowest I think for clonazepam is 0.5, which is equal to 5-10 milligrams of diazepam. So it's still a significant issue. So I do think that's another benefit of the substitution.
Yeah, I like your word. Actually, I hadn't come across that word, but I was familiar with the concept of a micro taper. Because I do think that's the thing. And that's why one of the things that, again, and working with the pharmacy colleague, came across this thing of the diazepam solution.
Right.
Because then you can really make very fine adjustments in really small steps.
I apologize for everybody at home. We had a slight technical glitch there, and I think we got our guest back. Colin, thanks for coming back. What else have you learned through? Have you had direct patients that have had this issue, or is your experience more through research?
No, more through direct patients.
Okay.
I mean, it's quite a difficult area to research, actually. So the research that I've done has been from two angles. One of which is looking just at the prescribing and dispensing data, which gives us a sense of how much benzodiazepines are being prescribed and how long they're being prescribed for, and so on. And I was saying that recent research shows that hasn't changed a whole lot. There's quite a attention onto this problem over the last 20 years. And then the other research that I've done primarily is with doctors and how they are seeing the problem or not, as the case may be. And I suppose a little bit around, say, this aspect of discomfort and how they can deal with that discomfort, as it were.
What do you see as the most common complaints from the patients who have been going through a protracted withdrawal or any type of withdrawal?
Yeah, I think the commonest symptoms you see, this is where it is particularly problematic, that they're pretty similar to, and sometimes even identical to, the original symptoms they had that the benzodiazepine prescribed. So, there's this, as I say, sense of anxiety, jitteriness, difficulty sleeping, those sorts of symptoms, which as I say, are the kind of things that might have led to they're being prescribed in the first place.
Okay.
So big overlap between withdrawal symptoms and symptoms of the underlying anxiety. And I suppose that raises another issue, which of course is that successful withdrawal does depend on helping the patient find alternative strategies for dealing with their anxiety.
Exactly. That's one thing we always talk about a lot on the podcast, is trying to find ways of managing anxiety. It's a perfect time to develop new anxiety tools because Absolutely. They can really benefit the severity of your symptoms during this time. But it's also very hard for them to do that because some of them are in a very difficult state. As you know, the suicidality during benzo withdrawal and benzo dependence can be very high. I think that's the best way to try to explain to people how severe this can be. that some
Yes.
people have taken their own lives because of the severity of it. People have lost jobs, people have lost relationships. I lost my career. So many of us have been through so many things because we can't do the things we used to do. It is an overwhelming illness for a time that thankfully it is temporary in almost all cases, but it can be protracted and it can last months or years, as you know.
Absolutely, yeah. And as I say, yeah, one of the things that I definitely talk to patients a lot about is you say this is a piece of work. It's not going to be easy. It's something we will have to spend some time and some effort on.
Right.
There will be some discomfort along the way. And you're right. I think one of the key things is to give them a sort of a goal and to visualize themselves in a life where they're free of the medicine. Good. And say ideally free from anxiety, and of course not completely free. That's unrealistic. It's kind of free to a point where your anxiety is at a manageable level, and you're not needing to take a medicine every day.
Yeah, and many people I know I've seen have actually come out of it with less anxiety. I believe primarily because they have learned new tools to manage it that they didn't have going in. Another factor that Ashton mentions, and I'd like to bring this up to you, one thing that I've seen repeatedly is the learning deficit. I don't know if you are familiar with what she mentioned here, but she says that one of the issues is while we're on benzodiazepines, of course, those drugs are managing our anxiety for us to some degree. Thus, we have not had to learn those tools for a period of time. When we come off of them, that deficit has been shown. So in addition to neurological changes with the GABA receptors and everything else, she also believed, and I feel like I've seen this in my work too, that there's also this learning deficit. We have not had to either maintain or develop anxiety tools while we were on the medication.
Yes, absolutely. And again, it's very important to say, sort of when on the medication, is to realize what the medication is for, what it's doing, because it's just it's one of its effects is to suppress your awareness and the cognition around your emotions and your feelings.
Exactly.
That again is, it's a temporary basis when you're very distressed. That can seem beneficial, but in the long run, as you say, it's disabling that you can't actually develop these strategies. You say that the majority of people have for coping with stress and emotion and so on. And again, and it's something that, as I say, not always discussed with physicians and so on, but is this fact that that people have sort of fluctuating emotions and stresses in their life and so on, that they have to learn to deal with. And there isn't a medical. It's good back to actually that sort of there's a pill for every ill, and I think that was one of the things that drove the benzodiazepines.
Exactly.
Sort of your mother's little helper and so on, and that there's a sort of medical solution to what are not medical problems. I mentioned earlier as well that this association with social deprivation and what are actually people who've very difficult lives, but just because you have a major problem in your life with unemployment or poor housing or whatever, it doesn't mean there's a medical solution. And in fact, as I say, medicine can sometimes quite often maybe be counterproductive. But what you need is more kind of practical help around the things that are
exactly. Taking yoga and learning breathing exercises and meditation, and these things take time and they take maintenance and they take work. It's much easier to say, I just want the pill to take care of it.
Yes, and there's skills that, and like all skills, like training and practice, they're not going to become good at relaxation techniques the first time you try them.
Exactly.
And again, there's a contrast in the difficulty, because the pill, as you say, seems quick and easy, whereas the real solution is slow and hard.
And that's the case with most things in life, isn't it?
So, Indeed it is. Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things we run into also is the polydrugging. I have several people that have reached out to me and saying, I'm on Effexor and clonazepam and Xanax and on, Ambien and all these different things, often psychotropics, sometimes SSRIs, SNRIs, and sometimes with benzos. And they're having trouble getting support from psychiatrists or doctors to say, do I come off? Do I not? I don't know what to come off of first. If I did, and I would really like to be drug-free is what most of them say, but they don't know how to go about it. Now, I understand sometimes a cocktail of psych meds can be beneficial for certain people, but we've seen some overprescribing. And those people who are polydrugged, who really don't know where to turn and say, look, I'm on 5 different medications, what do I do? a lot of them are having trouble getting support. Have you seen that, or and what would you say to somebody like that?
Yes, I've definitely seen it, and I suppose again it is a matter of going through the history of how
Okay.
they got the drugs, what were the problems, what are the drugs supposed to be doing, do they know why they were starting certain things, because that may be unclear, and sometimes one has to go back over, say, a letter from the psychiatry services and so on, try and get an understanding of how the situation developed. Having said that, my overall feeling would be, in relation to the sort of broad range of psychotropic drugs, benzodiazepines are ones that are unlikely to be essential, so to speak, and therefore the ones that are most likely to be worth trying to see if you can come off, without even referencing back to the mental health or psychiatric services. Obviously, things like the more severe psychotropics for people who've got severe mental conditions like schizophrenia, I wouldn't go drawing them off their psychotropics without conferring with the mental health specialists. But for benzodiazepines, I think it's much more the case that that's something that, look, you and I can tackle this together. We don't have to refer back to psychiatrists.
I understand that.
And then with the antidepressants, which would be the next ones I'd look at, again, my feeling there would be, you need to go through how they got on, how depressed they were, what's their current situation. And we do know that with antidepressants as well, they take a long time to kick in, so to speak. So they're not a quick, they don't have a quick pharmacological action. And then coming off them again, you don't want to do that too soon, but it is something that's desirable in the long run. And I would see, again, a similar thing, but not quite as a sort of complex. There's a sort of tapering, and sometimes you just find that, back to the thing we were saying earlier, if things are going well in their life, things have improved, they feel more mentally resilient, then we can look at stopping your antidepressants. So, as I say, in that order, so benzodiazepines, quick in, so therefore we can kind of tackle those early, and they're more symptom treatments rather than what's seen as curative treatments. Antidepressants are somewhere in the middle. I have to say, some people end up on antidepressants who actually didn't need them in the first place, and one has to look back at that. But if they definitely have benefited from them and they are now better, then one can come off those step by step, but usually with fewer steps. And then the major antipsychotics, that would be something I'd have to go back to the psychiatrist about. Although people can come off those too, for sure. I have a young man who had a major sort of psychotic incident, ended up in hospital, was quite ill, came to me on significant doses of psychotropics and antipsychotics, and yet he was feeling that, he was trying to say, well, I'm better now, I'm got a job, settled down, and live. It's interesting, he moved away from where he was from as well, which I think where some of his problems lay. And he was saying, but my psychiatrist won't let me stop them. So I said, okay, well, we won't stop them, but let's wean them down and see how you get on.
Right.
And he now, again, is, I think he's still on a small dose of an antipsychotic, but much less than he was on before. And he's only staying on that because he and I are both nervous that we don't want to end up back in hospital.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to start wrapping this up. But I did want to ask you at the end if you had any last words or advice, both for physicians and or for patients, or any, the things you would like to close with.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, I do talk to physicians quite a lot. I probably have more, because of my educational role, I have a lot more involvement with medical students and physicians in training, and physicians in fact, with post-training. And my big message to those is that benzodiazepines are not harmless. There's this very perception that, particularly as you say, those lower doses, people are on them a long period of time, that, what's the harm? And I said, there's quite a lot of harm. And you really, as you've highlighted, you might only see the harm when you try to stop it. So you need to recognize, first of all, that they're not harmless, but secondly, that doesn't mean, I'd say, to stop them straight away. There's a process to go through. It's a process you have to work with the patient, and there's no sort of one size fits all. It's very much a tailored approach, which you work out between you. And with, as I say, saying that the agreed goal at the outset should be a drug-free life, if possible. So that's my message to physicians, if you like. My message to patients, I suppose, is, and go back to really one of the things raised at the beginning, if you can't find a physician that you're comfortable with, then I wouldn't discourage people changing physician, I have to say. And if they can't find a physician, even if they shop around, then this is something that you can work on yourself with the support of, like I mentioned, the groups you've mentioned, kind of support groups and so on. But be careful in a sense. Don't go to the wrong source.
Right.
Talk to people. Find out who is, if like, got an informed approach in this area, and see if you can tackle the problem. There are other, and I suppose the other thing, just to say, there are other health professionals besides doctors. Again, not many doctors necessarily say this,
right?
But, there's definitely counsellors. We've got a good network here, actually, of community drug counsellors who, interestingly, I do a bit of work with. Many of them don't have a good relationship with doctors, which I always feel is a bit of a shame. But I find, from the point of view of the patients, that these are people who can be very helpful, and they're not sort of, if you like, fully trained health professionals, but they do have a specialist knowledge and experience in the area of drugs and alcohol, and they can be very helpful because they can take a patient, what I call a patient-centered approach, regardless of what the substance is, so to speak.
Right. I think I totally agree. In fact, counseling got me through and got so many people through. I think actually helping to teach counselors on the complications of benzodiazepine withdrawal is almost as important as trying to teach the physicians.
Absolutely, and again, as you say, it's also teaching, at least, well, encouraging the counselors to be to inform themselves so that they actually know what they're doing is safe, even if what they're doing isn't fully endorsed or being agreed by their physician.
Right. That makes sense. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Colin, for being on our show today. I really appreciate it. And this will be released here soon on 2 different episodes. So I think it'll be exciting to have it out. And it's been such great information. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Not at all. It's been my pleasure.
All right. Okay. Take care. I want to thank Dr. Bradley for his time in speaking with us today. Oh, thank you so much. Learning about this problem from a different point of view across the ocean in a totally different country, especially from a country that identified the issues of benzodiazepines long before we really started to pay attention here in the U.S. This opens our eyes and helps us identify the successes and pitfalls that this journey might take. I am very grateful to Dr. Bradley for his kindness and dedication to this problem, and especially for taking time to speaking with us on the podcast. Before we close today's episode, though, allow me just 25 seconds for our disclaimer. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice in any way. The host of this podcast is not a medical professional, nor is he engaged in rendering medical, health, or psychological advice, nor any other kind of personal or professional services. The views and opinions expressed by our listeners and interview guests on this podcast, whether read from textual submissions or presented in their own voice, do not necessarily reflect those of the Benzo Free podcast or of its host. Withdrawal tapering or any other change in dosage of benzodiazepines, non-benzodiazepines, or any other prescription drug should only be done under the direct supervision of a licensed physician. Our full disclaimer can be viewed on our website at benzofree.org/disclaimer. And that closes out this episode. Thanks again to Dr. Bradley, and I hope to be back soon with a new episode. I already have an idea, and I'm going to jump on it here pretty soon, I promise. Keep calm, taper slowly, and take care of yourself. I'll see you next time.